Good morning.
Why not start there?
Over the years I've been here, I've noticed on your bookshelf here, obviously a wonderful fondness for your teacher and for the work of the Advaita Press. And also within there is the copy, I don't know if you have one out here right now, of the Sing Sing Ming, the verses on the faith mind. And I guess my first kind of reflection is for you, is, or question in the front book query is, how is it that that became part of what you offer here?
Right.
And then the corollary to that would be the curiosity that the person that translated that, his life story is kind of interesting, and how that's the one you have here, I think, is the third translation of that particular expression of non-duality.
Mm-hmm.
So where did that come from?
Well, it came, I was originally came across the book when I was seeking, and I was captivated by it. I felt that it really had a very strong, I had a strong resonance with it. And particularly that translation, the translation I had, I saw first was the first one. And for those of you who are not familiar with the book that we're talking about, it's a it is a book that begins with the phrase that
the way is not difficult.
the great way is not difficult. Thank you. For those, the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. And this, when I read that, it really struck me that there seemed to be some truth in it. That my preferences seemed to have an impact on my life, clearly. And I thought, in really looking at it and thinking about it, I thought, you know, every time I prefer one thing, it's like a pendulum. Every time I prefer one thing, it seems to swing back to the opposite. So I'm happy that I get what I prefer, and then I'm miserable when that's taken away. And I thought, yeah, so the great way, life, would be so much easier if I just didn't have any preferences. So I set about not having any preferences. And I really, really made an effort. I'm telling you, I made a big effort, you know. And what I observed initially was that my preferences seemed to be attached to my passions. You know, they seem to be wrapped up together. So I thought, okay, what I'm really looking to do is to get centered, to get quiet, to be still. And then I won't have any preferences. I won't be, all over the map. And the great way won't be difficult anymore. So I set about doing that. And I mean, I tried all kinds of things. I remember I cut meat out of my diet. Meat had the passion of the dying animal in it, and I was taking that into my body. And so I, cut out meat. That one was good. Rock and roll music. Rock and roll music got me moving. So okay. So I started listening to Kenny G.
Oh,
God! Kenny. Nobody's passions were ever stirred by Kenny G. I was in safe territory. Everything was fine. Sex. Sex was a little more difficult. I was at the end of a dead marriage, and so not having sex was not difficult, but not thinking about sex was difficult. And in fact, it was extremely difficult. So but I was able to kind of contain all of this, and to kind of get this pendulum to, stop swinging quite so much. And fortunately, I had just met Ramesh around this time, and I was able to share with him what it was I was doing. And I ran the whole scenario by him and told him all what I was doing in order to get this to stop swinging, and so that the great way would stop being difficult. And he looked at me with that expression that I can visualize today. That it was a mixture of pity and compassion, as I'm describing this. And finally he said, "Yes, Wayne," he said, "Do you know what this is? When he said, this is death. When the pendulum stops swinging, that is death. And so what you're trying to do is to be dead while you're alive." And that seemed to explain part of my difficulty. And so, interestingly, this same man who translated this book in 1972, and he learned Chinese in order to do it. He lived in a monastery or a Zen center or Buddhist center in Massachusetts. And he was there for a long time. And 30 years later, in 2002 or something, he retranslated the same text with a considerably deeper understanding. And the same line, he retranslated this way. He said, "The great way is not difficult for those not attached to preferences." Originally it was, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." And it is this subtle quality between not having them and not being attached to them that is the basis for a far more profound and deep understanding of what this teaching is pointing to. So, and it is often in the early stages of spiritual, in the early stages of one's spiritual quest, the strokes are quite broad, and so we cut stuff out, and this isn't spiritual, and this is spiritual, and then it keeps getting more subtle, and the recognition, the understanding that is being pointed at gets more subtle. And so rather than throwing out everything that is manifest and it's all illusion and nothing matters and you can't do anything, and all of these broad strokes that are part of the initial understanding of this teaching get refined, and you begin to recognize and realize that yes, you can do things, but you are not the source of the doing. You can do them, but you're not the source of them. That what is manifest is illusory only to the extent that when that appearance is that it is an independent expression. That all of these objects are quanta, or independent things. That's the illusion. But this is a deeper kind of understanding, a deeper kind of recognition. And it often takes time. It often takes sometimes many years, not necessarily so, but often it does. But for me, as has been the case so much of my life, it did boil down to sex. Because I was looking at this question of preferences, and I thought, okay, here I am, I'm sitting here, and on this side, I have a beautiful woman who wants to make love with me. And on this side, I have a big, ugly man who wants to beat the shit out of me. And I have no preference. And I realized that this was not going to happen. And what's more, I didn't want it to happen. That was not a life that attracted me, ultimately, in which everything was the same, nothing made any difference, it was all tofu. Bland, colorless substance without any inherent quality. I didn't want to live a tofu existence. And so the recognition that what gives life its vivacity, what gives life its color and passion, is these qualities and characteristics that are manifest.
The desire to have no preferences being yet another desire.
Of course.
I hate that.
Okay. Fair enough.
I was recently at Universal Studios with my daughter.
I'm sorry.
And I was thinking about, the stimulation that you get from, the attraction to sex and the avoidance of being beat up. But there's so much sensory input there that it's just kind of overwhelming, and that perhaps one of the ways of having a more spiritual life is to become more sensitive, get away from this overstimulation and become more sensitive to the smaller, more subtle kinds of stimulation, and how that can also be pleasant. And is that just pushing the goalposts back, so to speak, or
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Absolutely, it is.
So it's not different in
In
quality, just quantity.
Any substantive way, no.
Okay.
That what we're talking about as the thing that creates the suffering, that makes the great way difficult, is the attachment.
Yeah.
Not the quality of the thing in itself.
The stimulus.
Right. So whether the stimulus is gross or it's fine, makes no difference. You can get as attached to meditation as you can to sex.
Or roller coasters.
Or whatever. Whatever is what some kind of big passionate thing. The same attachment can happen.
don't see Zen monasteries in, well, I take that back, you do. See them in big cities or that kind of thing.
You don't see roller coasters in them very often, no. You know, and they're generally not fucking each other silly in them, you know, because the emphasis there is on the more subtle aspects. That is one path, certainly. All I'm saying is that ultimately, what Sinsen Ming was pointing at is that it isn't that which is the ultimate problem. The stimulation isn't the problem, and the reduction of the stimulation isn't the ultimate solution. It may be a path to a deeper understanding, but it in itself is not the ultimate solution. The attachment itself, what we call here the secondary involvement, by the false sense of authorship, by the sense of being an independent entity, that is what creates the suffering.
The secondary involvement?
Which is another word for attachment.
Okay.
And is your attachment, shows up because you see yourself as being complete by that, or what's behind the attachment? Lack of feeling complete in some sense, or that completes?
Well, that's the attraction. I mean, what stimulates often our grasping is a desire for completion, for fulfillment, for wholeness, union. Because the claim of authorship is lonely. It's you are feeling independent, isolated, disconnected, and there is a yearning, an inherent yearning that is because your true nature is connected. So to be true, we use these expressions: be true to yourself, to be who you are, is simply to recognize what your nature is, and that draw, that pull, is very much part of the life of a seeker. So the pull, well, not just seekers, but I mean the life of human beings. And so the pull towards that which satisfies, even briefly, is very strong. And for those people who are addictive by nature, who are compulsive by nature, they're then the return to that, quote, source of the momentary relief, of that which provides that feeling of release from the bondage of oneself, that gives one that expansion, even if for a moment, and be it a drug, be it sex, be it food, be it objects, a new car, a flashy piece of jewelry, whatever it is, that for a moment gives you that feeling of contentment and completion and peace. That can be the root of an addiction if you are by nature addicted.
Yeah, I'm just having a little trouble with attachment and secondary involvement and
Okay.
seeing for example, let's say you've got a dog, you love your dog,
Yes.
you've had it 10 years,
Yeah.
and dog runs into the street, gets run over,
Yes.
and to me at least, let's say there'd be an emotional attachment to your dog, grief about the dog's death,
Correct.
and that would be basic pain but not suffering.
Correct.
So there's an attachment to the dog, an emotional attachment,
Right.
but that's not the suffering.
Right.
the suffering would be that son of a bitch wasn't paying attention, that shouldn't have happened.
I shouldn't have let the
Yeah,
dog out. I
right.
should have had him on a leash.
Yeah, all
I
that
did-
stuff.
All that stuff. Yes.
Okay, so that's what you would call attachment rather than the emotional investment?
That's what I
Okay,
would. Yes.
okay.
Absolutely. Emotional investment is simply being alive.
Okay.
I mean, that's, you know, if you have the capacity to be emotionally available, then you form relationships, and when those relationships are severed, there's pain. That's I mean, Ramesh used to tell the story of this man who was associated with in India, who well, actually, I can. They're both dead. I can name the names. This man named Dixit, who published I Am That and various other books in Bombay, and he had a bookstore and a publishing house called Satsang, and he was associated with the teaching for a long time and at some point considered himself enlightened. And Ramesh describes how when this man's wife died, he came to Ramesh and he was distraught. I mean, what he was distraught about was that he was feeling all of this emotion because he had the idea, I'm enlightened, I shouldn't be affected by this. And he was, and it disturbed him. Because the misperception was that enlightenment brought this cessation of movement, the stillness in which nothing affected you. Now, I was with Ramesh when we were doing a tour here in the States in, I think 1989. And we were in Seattle, in this fellow's home, staying in this fellow's home. And in the middle of the night, a phone call came from India notifying Ramesh that his son had just died. And he was absolutely devastated, emotionally devastated. I mean, was weeping inconsolably, as would a father whose child had just died, who he loved passionately, deeply. And what struck me at the time was, in a sense, how pure the pain was. Because it was very much in the moment. It was pure animal pain. And I use the term animal to point to something. That an animal expresses pain directly. There's no story around it of what I should have done or what should have happened or this should or shouldn't be. There's pain of the moment without any, in this case, secondary involvement. So there was pain without suffering, but the pain was intense. The grief was intense and passionate.
You mentioned I am that, the book.
Uh-huh.
What does that mean? I am that. A big question.
Good luck.
Because sometimes I think, I've seen that book and I've read a bit of it, that it's like I am that is that all the sensate input I get creates who I am, like just the heat and the hearing and seeing and thinking and all that. It just is so much input that it creates the sense of self.
Mhm.
Is that what it means?
I'm the last person on earth to tell you what Nisargadatta Maharaj meant. First of all, he never said I am that,
Oh.
because he spoke Marathi, and that's English.
Right.
So, that phrase was created by the translator. So these words are pointers to something deeper.
I like the idea that it's that which is present without any secondary involvement. Yeah. So the Sing Sing Man, the first line, I'm familiar with that one. The one that gets me, which is interesting to me, and I have to ask you about it. What I do, my process, I walk a lot at work. So I walk a mile to work and I walk a mile back from work. And I have the net of jewels for chewing on hard bark. And then in the back, I've clipped the Sing Sing Ming, which is more like a bomb. I mean, it's a poetic bomb, really. But the other passage that was in there says, to know this reality directly is possible only through practicing non-duality.
Mm-hmm.
And practicing non-duality seems to obviously be the way that he interpreted that, but it seems to smack a little bit and bounce around a little bit from the standpoint of what we're doing here. And I know you're going to say, you gotta go to the graveyard and dig up his body and reinfuse the corpse and get him walking again to ask him about what the hell he meant. But it's really powerful that's in there. I mean, along with him telling you to know it directly and give you that kind of instruction. But what's your sense on that?
I mean,
and
practicing.
it backs into all the Zen traditions, right?
Yeah.
Like, enlightenment is not conditionally generated, right? And the people that are saying that run massive monasteries where obviously there's a very strict structure of meditation and practice, and everything that you do is, chopping wood, carrying water kind of a thing. And so it's, I don't know, it's interesting to go back to it. I try not to obviously try to have any concrete idea of what he's talking about, but it certainly is curious. Is that curious to you as well, or what do you think about that particular one? If
And the only word, did you say only?
Yeah, I can show you the text.
No, I believe.
And it's like,
no.
And see, I never get that kind of like only. It's like only, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm personally not a big fan of onlys.
Yeah.
And so that was the only word of all that kind of jumped out at me. But I mean, translators.
He's already setting this up, right? To know something directly, you are that which you're trying to know. So he's playing. I always call this practice it's a poetic enterprise, right?
Yes.
It's a pointer. It's never gonna
That's right.
turn into any particularized kind of truth.
Yes.
So he's kind of in a sense, I think noodling the person that's reading and reflecting upon that to look at that.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean,
all right.
the thing is that
Are we practicing non-duality? Is that what we're doing here? I thought we weren't practicing anything.
well, it very much depends on how you define the term practice and what that means to you. And practice is very often associated with authorship. I'm practicing. The very notion of practice is vital food for the sense of authorship, you see. But these quote practices are simply doings. And one doing isn't inherently better than another doing. They all have the same source. And yet, those doings tend to yield different kinds of things. So, I mean, there's no question that if you spend 10 years in a Zen monastery, you will tend to have a far different temperament and perspective and outcome than if you spend the same 10 years traveling around riding roller coasters in the world. Those two practices will yield far different kinds of awarenesses and perspectives and insights. Not necessarily deeper, not necessarily better, but clearly different. Now, those enterprises like Zen monasteries and Catholic monasteries and all of the, the religious corporate structures have, their own life, their own inherent qualities and characteristics, which each of them profess to be the best and the most direct means to God, to enlightenment, to union with the infinite, whatever. So the self says, I want to know if I approach meditation correctly. In order to tell I am, I find it easy to just listen to the sound of silence, the continuous high noise in my ears. Is this a proper way to meditate? It is one way to meditate. As far as I'm concerned, there is no proper way to meditate. There is only meditation that happens, and that it produces what it produces for you. That is my observation. So if your question is, are you meditating correctly? Yes.
I'm not sure I buy that. Because
Well, that's okay, because I'm not selling it.
is there if there's a sense of a goal to get away from the suffering inherent in our small existence, wouldn't there be paths of meditation that would move you away from that? So am I
Yes,
made a
if
false
that's how you do,
assumption?
if you, that's how you define meditation, then absolutely. You can measure the quality of the meditation in accordance with the goal. But you first have to set up the goal.
Right.
And
But if you're seeking, if someone is seeking,
Yes.
is there not a goal?
there's often a goal. So what happens frequently is that when you begin seeking, and then for many people their seeking is focused on this goal of enlightenment, of whatever union, whatever you want to call it, and there's some concept of what that is, and that is the point at which the seeking is directed. So it's all focused on that. There is movement towards that. There's progress, measurable as you approach that point. And all that is not that is discarded as you approach this, which is the ultimate. Now, what happens for some seekers, and generally the ones who end up here and who come back, are the ones for whom this process has shifted. So there is this movement towards this, and then a awakening happens in which the seeking energy shifts from the focus on something to an expansion in which more and more is included as it. So this seeking is now expansive, no longer focused on a goal per se. It is simply an expansion of understanding in which more and more is brought into that.
So, practice without authorship would move practice from a noun, a person, a place, or a thing, which is an objectified part of reality, and pushes it more as a description or a pointer, an adjective. So it seemed like it. It's like, because
I don't know. I'm the 8th grade parts of speech. I was thinking about something else, I think, for the whole year. So
I'm just saying, practice, practicing duality, practice is a person, a place, or a thing. It has a concretized aspect that's around that word. And what you were talking about was you're talking about the authorship component of that. And what I was doing was saying, well, maybe practice is more of an adjective. It modifies our understanding as a pointer of what we see around us, or we just get rid of the word practice and retranslate.
Whatever works for you. Really, I mean,
Yeah. Well, you play these games. I mean, the ings, the verbs, the seer without the seen and the seeing is absolutely happening. It's a happening in our immediate experience. We can't deny that I'm looking and seeing and talking and communicating with you.
Yes.
I mean, everything else is up for grabs, though. The objectified notion that there's something separate here, that there's something separate there, and all that. So there it is. I don't know. But I think it's interesting to look at that.
yeah,
But
I
it's
think
not
it's
great-
very interesting to
It's not
look at
great.
it,
It's,
and then
then you're like, yeah, there it
then
goes.
move on to the next thing. Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Can I say, if I adopt the attitude, the universe is practicing through me? Is that helpful? So I'm getting kind of
It could be.
here.
It certainly could be a attitude that is more freeing or open. But the big word in that whole sentence is if. If you do it. Yeah, if you do it, then perhaps it will have a positive benefit for you. We will see what happens. The presumption is that often in such a statement is that you have the ability inherently to do that. Once you identify that that's going to be beneficial for you, and you will then, okay, no, I see that's going to work, so
No
I'll
way
do that.
It's constructive, intentional doing. I mean, that's what practice is. Those are the words that pop up in my head. I'm not really trying to think about it, but it's constructive, moving towards some kind of an aim. It's there's the doing quality of it, and there's intentional as you have some kind of intention. But I think what you're pointing at is what's underneath these aspects that, as a part of consciousness, is giving shape and form to whatever that is. I mean,
So you have intentions.
yeah.
And sometimes your intentions are fulfilled. You do what you intend. Other times, you do not do what you intend. Sometimes you do what you intend with an expected outcome, and the expected outcome comes. Sometimes you do what you intend, and the expected outcome does not come. So what we're saying is, practice sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. And whether you do it or not is clearly not in your control. I don't know how many times you've set your alarm to wake up at 6 to meditate, and then you go, tomorrow. So you had the intention, you made the effort, and it didn't happen.
would if I could, but I can't, so I don't, so I won't.
Sure.
Oh, I'm fucked.
Or you're free.
Mm.
Mhm.